Hey everyone, welcome back to Jukebox, and thank you for tuning in to part 2 of our wedding invitation video series where we create a Pan Am inspired vintage wedding suite. In today's video, we're going to be focused on letterpress printing and die cutting to create the formal wedding invite, an RSVP card, and the interior pages for our baggage check booklet. In part 1, we focused on screen printing and die cutting, so if you haven't seen that video, take a look at the description below for a link. And without further ado, here's part 2.
Let's first take a look at the Pantone color we'll be mixing and matching today. We've chosen Pantone 3538U as the closest match to the original Pan Am blue. I've weighed out all the base inks in portions that match the recipe in the Pantone swatch guide. The only difference is I'll be swapping out transparent white for opaque white. Doing so will give us a more solid and opaque appearance to our color. I'll dab out a small amount of ink on the paper we'll be printing with and compare to the hue on the swatch. I'll also make sure we're matching to the screen printed pieces from part 1. Now to set up the copper etched printing plate for the first pass of letterpress printing. I'm using a simple double-sided tape to adhere the plate to our boxcar base. The base is locked tightly into the chase with furniture and a coin on 2 sides. For short runs like this, I won't be setting up the ink duct. Instead, I'll evenly spread a decent amount of ink on the small distributing cylinder. I'll set the chase in place in the press and get ready to pull the first proof. I like to make my first impression onto a single sheet of standard 60-pound text weight stock. With this first proof, I'll be able to determine the size of my press sheet and get a basic sense of the make-ready work that is to come. Next, I'll tape down a second piece of 60-pound text weight in the press to use as a make-ready spot sheet or a patch-up sheet. I'll take an impression and then tuck this sheet under the tympan. Over at the cutter, I'll trim my paper down to the press sheet size I need. I'm using a 40-point cotton paper with a cream tone. Since the 40-point paper is enormously thick compared to the 60-pound TechSuite sheet, I'll need to back the press's impression off and make a few adjustments so that the paper feeds and delivers as needed. Using the first print on our cotton stock, I'll check for straightness and then closely inspect the sheet for areas that require more or less impression. I like how this lower logo is pressing in, but I can tell that other areas will need to be adjusted to make the overall print as even as possible. The top half and left side require a bit of packing in order to do this. I'll pull my make-ready sheet up from under the tympan and begin to paste on thin sheets of feathered tissue paper in the areas that need to be pressed in more. I'll take another impression and you can clearly see the difference. A closer look at the details show us that our artwork is printing cleanly and evenly across the entire sheet. Before we start running, I'll do another color check to make sure our ink density is accurate to the swatch and our screen printed folder. Alright, it's time to print. I'm going to skip feed this run as I've noticed the ink looks more solid, dense, and color accurate with a double hit of ink on each sheet. This also helps to take care of any ghosting that may appear across the run. With the first pass finished, I'll wash up the press and get ready for the second color. I'll place the printing plate as closely as possible in position with the previous plate, and then start inking up with a solid black ink. I'm going to leave the existing make-ready sheet in place because these two plates are similar in surface area and ink coverage. A closer look at the first impression of black ink shows us how the registration is extremely close, but not quite close enough. I'll make a small adjustment to the side guide and place a thin piece of tape on the left-hand lower brass gauge to shim the sheet into register. Our crop marks now land perfectly in place, so we're ready to print. Once again, I'm going to skip feed this run so that the appearance of black is as dense and saturated as possible. Skip feeding can be labor intensive and will sometimes lay down too much ink, so it's important to keep an eye on the prints. A closer look at the artwork shows just how cleanly the fine dots and lines are reproducing. I'll wash up the press and get ready for the next step, die cutting. I'm using an in-house 2-up steel rule die to form the paper into the shape of a flight ticket. I'll only be using half the die to cut into the paper, but this won't be an issue with the right attention to our make ready. If done incorrectly, the steel rule die could be damaged or interfere with the die cut piece. I'll start by adjusting the press to accommodate our press sheet. I'll lower the impression on the machine to just below 0 as this paper stock is very thick and I don't want our first impression to hit too hard. Using the first sheet, I'll check the registration of the cut and move the die in the chase as needed. In this case, I'll be moving a 6-point reglet down and some 2-point letting up, which will move our die up by 4 points on the sheet. Once it's registered, I'll check to see how it's cutting. Not a clean cut at all. In order to fix this, we'll use a patch-up sheet or make-ready sheet, just like we did when we printed our artwork. This make-ready sheet is pressed into to show where the steel rule is and isn't cutting cleanly. I'll circle the areas where the cut lines and perforation rule isn't making contact quite hard enough. Using a calipered make-ready tape, I'll patch up the areas that need a slight bit more pressure. Next, I'll place this patch-up sheet underneath the die jacket and run another sheet. The sheet is now cutting cleanly and perfectly. The perforations are also cutting cleanly and not separating too easily. We're ready to run. Alright, we're going to make one last letterpress printed piece before we wrap up part 2. Using all the same steps as we did for the first piece, I'll set up the die, the press, and the sheets to make the interior pages for our baggage check booklet. The only real difference here is that I'm going to be printing on an 80-pound text weight stock instead of a thick cotton paper. The goal will be to make a perfect kiss of ink onto the sheet with little or no impression at all. The biggest change to the press will require adjustment to the feed table, air blast, and sucker bar tilt to make sure that we don't pick up double or triple sheets in each pass. This press doesn't have a double sheet detector, so all of these adjustments are made by feel. If the press picks up too many sheets at once, the printing plate could be damaged. Taking a closer look at our first proof, I can see that the solid areas aren't printing cleanly and have a salty appearance. Also, some of the type appears to be thicker on one side of the sheet than on the other. This tells me that the spot sheet and overall impression will need some adjustment. I'll pack up the needed areas with a thin sheet of tissue paper and increase the impression level by a small amount. This looks much better. We're ready to print. This printed piece looks best without a skip feed, so I'll let it run while keeping an eye on the overall color. So let's have a final look at the two pieces we've completed today. And here's everything we've made so far, including the envelope and baggage check covers from our first video in this series. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll be printing the final piece in this wedding invite suite, and we'll also be trimming down and assembling everything into one complete package. Thanks again for watching, and please subscribe to our channel if you like what you've seen here, and we'll see you next time.